chicken noodle soup suffers from the same problem as ramen. Making something wet taste transcendent requires a lot of effort. These days, asking you to spend several days making ramen is totally normal. I'm sure there is a 100-hour ramen video out there. But asking you to spend several hours making chicken noodle soup is a tough sell. I mean, it's something you eat when you're sick or after a bad breakup, not something you really plan. That's why I've never liked it. I love the broth. It's the tastiest thing to sip from a cup, especially when accompanied by pirashki. But the stringy chicken and mushy pasta, they just ruin it for me. This year, I finally decided to solve every problem that has ever bugged me about chicken noodle soup. It took months, but I can finally report success. Here are my 7 secrets to perfection. Salt the chicken a day ahead to make it really succulent. Remove the chicken after 1.5 hours of a very gentle simmer to prevent overcooking. Cook the bones longer than the chicken to extract the most gelatin. Be patient and get the sofrito really jammy. Use tomatillos to add brightness. Make your own noodles. And only put it all together in the soup bowl, not in the pot, so that all the components have the right texture. The good news is that you can use all these strategies a la carte. Any technique from this video can be applied to any other chicken noodle soup and make it better. Of course, the devil is in the details, so here they are. The base for our soup will be the blond chicken stock. A blond stock is made from raw chicken and a brown stock is made from roasted or seared chicken. I've made numerous videos about brown chicken stock, but this is the first time I'm making a blond stock on my channel. That's because brown stock is way better in sauces. It's a chameleon that blends into any dish, and even if you make it out of chicken, you can use it to deglaze a pan after searing a steak or a duck breast or a pork chop. But the blond chicken stock has its advantages too. The chicken flavor in it is much more pronounced, and if you are making a chicken noodle soup, that's a good thing. Every part of the chicken is useful here except for the breasts. The breasts won't hurt your stock, but they won't help either since they don't have much connective tissue. That's the chewy bits made of collagen. After a long simmer, this collagen converts to gelatin and gives your broth a lovely richness. That's the first thing the store-bought stock is missing, the gelatin. If you don't feel like breaking down your own chicken, don't. Just go buy chicken legs. They make fabulous stock. The only reason to break down your own chicken is because it's a lot cheaper than buying parts and because you get a chicken breast roast, which is not easy to find in the stores. Salting ahead or dry brining, as it's known these days, is a great way to keep the chicken moist. People do it when they grill, sear, fry, braise, and roast. But pre-salting the chicken for making a soup seems silly. I mean, this bird will be swimming in water. Won't that make it moist? Not exactly. It will make it very soft, but not really succulent. Left to its own devices, this chicken will give all its water to the broth. Great for the broth, but not so great for the chicken. I found that there are 2 techniques that helped rescue the chicken from this doom. One is salting ahead, and the second is removing the meat from the broth early and then letting the bone, skin, and cartilage cook longer to extract more gelatin. Here are my chicken parts that I salted yesterday. I've got a whole chicken here minus the breasts. You can replace all this with 4 legs. It's helpful to cut them into thighs and drumsticks. The more cartilage you expose, the more gelatin you'll release. But if you really don't want to dirty a cutting board, don't worry about it. Cover the chicken with about 2 quarts of cold water. Move things around a bit, cover and bring to almost a boil. Uncover it so that it doesn't boil over and bring to a full boil. Turn down the heat to maintain a bare simmer. This will prevent all this gunk from breaking up into tiny bits and making your stock muddy. The slow heat will also result in a more tender chicken. Skim the foam once, but don't drive yourself crazy since we'll be straining the stock. If you have a bowl of water handy, it will make getting the scum off the spoon a lot easier. Set a timer for 1.5 hours, which is when we'll be removing the chicken. Now let's talk about aromatics. I like to use a ton of them because that makes the stock way more interesting and delicious. I'll cut up some of my carrot into this fun shape and we'll save it for adding to the soup in the end after the stock is done and strained. I'll chop the rest coarsely and add to the stock. You can certainly eat the vegetables from the stock, but they end up very overcooked, and I prefer to add new veggies for actual eating. Obviously, my carrot is ginormous. If yours is not as big, you'll need 1 carrot for the stock and another one for the soup. Use your judgment. This is not baking. Some people are obsessed with adding onion skins to the stock. It's totally up to you. This only helps with the color, not the flavor, but be careful that the skins have no moldy or dirty parts. It's a good idea to peel off at least the top layer. It's also very difficult to chop an onion with the skin on, so I like to take it off before chopping. Dump all these aromatics into your stock. Add a bay leaf, a bunch of thyme sprigs, a big handful of parsley or a bunch of parsley stems, and about half a teaspoon of whole black peppercorns. Push everything into the water and simmer very, very gently until the chicken has been poaching for 1.5 hours. Get all the chicken parts out of the stock. Scrape off the skin and remove the bones. Your chicken should be incredibly tender at this point. Go ahead and taste it. I know it's just boiled chicken, but seriously, go ahead. Is that good or what? If you don't want to make a chicken noodle soup, you can make an awesome chicken salad out of it and just drink the stock or use it in some other soup. The back has a ton of meat too, so don't just discard it. Make sure you get rid of all the cartilage, tendons, and little bones. You don't want to give someone a bony soup. I realize that normally you cool food uncovered, but I strongly suggest you cover this chicken with plastic to prevent it from drying up. If it's spread out on a plate, it will still cool, but a bit slower. Put all the bone, skin, cartilage, and fat back into the stock. I'll return my stock back to a simmer and cook the bones for another 1.5 hours to get more gelatin out of them. If you have to cut corners, this is the one corner you can safely cut. How gelatinous your stock is makes a huge difference to the pan sauces, but not a huge difference to the soups. It's quite good already. While our bones are cooking, let's work on the sofrito. That's the base that will give our soup a great flavor punch. It's going to start with an ingredient you don't necessarily expect to see in a European chicken noodle soup: tomatillos. If you've never had tomatillos, they taste like very acidic tomatoes. I got an idea for using them from Alison Roman. Alison is the queen of bright flavors that she borrows from all over the world and then brings to European cooking. There are 4 things that tomatillos bring to the table: acidity, sweetness, pectin that acts as a slight thickener, and smokiness because we're going to fire roast them. Peel off the papery skin from your tomatillos. It's normal for them to be a little sticky. Cut out the core using a small knife. Put them onto a foil-covered baking sheet and place under the broiler for about 5 to 10 minutes or until they are nicely charred. Flip them over and cook the other side till it turns black. If you don't burn them enough, they'll be very hard to peel. While our tomatillos are cooling, let's prep the rest of the sofrito. Dice 1 rib of celery and 1 yellow onion. Put them into a medium pot and add the fat of your choice. In my opinion, butter is tastiest, but you can also use olive oil or skim the fat off of your stock and use that. Today I'll use a couple tablespoons of butter and some fat from my stock. Add a generous pinch of salt and cook, stirring occasionally, over moderately low heat. I like to cover the pot in the first 5 to 10 minutes to help the vegetables soften. And then continue uncovered for another 10 minutes or so until they're very tender and start to brown. At this point, I add a minced garlic clove, another pinch of salt, and continue to cook everything until almost jammy. This can take another 5 to 10 minutes. Don't rush this step. It makes a big difference to the flavor of the soup. Let's peel the tomatillos and add them to the soup. You can, of course, replace tomatillos with tomatoes and a splash of balsamic vinegar. Add all the juice that accumulated in the pan. It's smoky, viscous, and delicious. Bring everything to a boil, salt generously, and break up the tomatillos with a flat-edged spoon. Keep boiling this mixture down until it thickens. Taste and correct for salt. This mixture should be very acidic, but once you add the stock, it will become quite mild, but still bright. I find it so delicious, it takes all my willpower not to eat it all. Our stock is done, so let's set a fine mesh strainer over the pot with the sofrito and strain it in. To avoid a terrible mess, I like to ladle it instead of pouring it. Press firmly on the salads and dump them back into the pot where you cooked the stock. Add about a cup of cold water and swish it around. It will help you get the last bits of stock out of the salads. Pour that into the pot with the sofrito. Press on the salads again, and now you can discard them. Stir the soup to distribute the sofrito evenly, and then taste it. Adjust the salt. Add the reserved cute carrots and simmer them just until tender when you poke them with a fork. This will take about 20 minutes. Ideally, I like to let the soup cool and refrigerate it overnight before serving. I don't have any scientific explanation for it, but it tastes even better the next day. You can certainly use store-bought noodles of any kind, but if you want to get your feet wet with fresh pasta, this is a great opportunity because these noodles are very forgiving. We don't even need a pasta roller, since perfect thinness is not the goal here. We'll just use a rolling pin. These noodles can be made ahead and frozen. I often make a big batch, portion them, and freeze so that I can put them into the soup whenever I want. We've made this dough on my channel many times. It's the one I use for pelmeni and vareniki. Set a bowl over a scale and weigh 300 grams of bread flour. Set another bowl on the scale and add 1 egg, 1 yolk, and enough water to equal 185 grams of wet ingredients if you're located in a very dry climate, like a desert or a typical New England winter. If you're in a more humid climate, go with 175 grams of wet ingredients. Put the flour into the food processor. Pour in the egg-water mixture. Add 2 teaspoons of diamond crystal kosher or 1 teaspoon of table salt or 5.7 grams of any salt weighed on a high precision scale. Run the processor until there is no dry flour remaining. Get all these clumps out onto the work surface. Don't forget to include what's stuck under the blade and what remains on the walls. Absolutely everything needs to come out. Knead your dough for 1 minute. At first it will be sticky and you might need to help yourself with a pastry scraper. After the first minute, it should stop sticking completely. If it's still sticking, knead in more flour during the next 8 minutes of kneading. Even if you aren't adding any flour, you still need to knead the dough for 8 minutes to develop sufficient gluten. If you want to see a thorough tutorial on pasta dough and kneading, look in the description below for a link to my general pasta dough tutorial. It's the same process, just more eggs and less water than this dough. You can't over knead pasta dough, so if you aren't kneading as quickly as I am, give yourself at least 12 minutes. When the kneading time is up, sprinkle the dough with flour and wrap tightly in plastic wrap. It needs to rest for at least 1 hour at room temperature before you can roll it out, but longer is fine. Sprinkle the dough generously with flour and roll it out on a well-floured work surface to a thickness of about 1 centimeter. Cut a few strips and wrap the rest of the dough so that it doesn't dry up. Roll out each strip. Keep adding flour to prevent sticking. If you aren't sure about the thickness, you can cook a little chunk to see what you like. Keep in mind that the noodles will soften out in the soup, so you want them somewhat thick and chewy. If the strip gets too long, cut it in half and work on each half separately. You don't need to get them too thin. Sprinkle the middle of each ribbon with flour so that it doesn't stick to the rack and hang it to dry. The drying is only necessary if you want to use my more efficient cutting method and if you plan to freeze the noodles. If you want to cook them immediately, you could cut them into rough shapes without stacking right now. Once your noodles have the texture of soft leather, it's time to cut. They shouldn't be tacky, but should still be completely pliable. Be careful not to over-dry them or they'll crack. How long it takes to dry them depends on your humidity. Could be as little as 10 minutes and as much as 30. Make a mixture of about 50% cornstarch and 50% rice flour, or you can use one or the other. This will reduce sticking tremendously. Lightly coat the noodles in this mixture and stack them up. You can cut them to be shorter if it's more convenient. Fold the stack over and slice. You really don't need to worry about the shape here. It's a soup and it's meant to be rustic. If you want to freeze, arrange the noodles in a single layer in Ziploc bags and use some flat surface to move them to the freezer. If you just pick up the bags, they'll all clump up together. To cook the noodles, bring a large pot of heavily salted water to a boil. Add the noodles, stir thoroughly, cover, cook for 1 minute and get them out. Coat them with butter and place into soup bowls. There is no rush at this point. They can sit like this for 5 to 10 minutes and will rewarm when you pour in the hot soup. I like to chop up the chicken into bite-sized pieces and only add it to the soup for 2 minutes before serving. We cooked it so nicely, let's not overcook it now. If your chicken and soup were chilled overnight, bring the soup back to the simmer, take off heat, add the chicken, give it 2 minutes to warm up, and pour over the cooked noodles. I know that this soup looks completely ordinary due to my poor photography and food styling skills, but it tastes ridiculously good. The only thing I would change is the thickness of the noodles. Normally, I roll them thicker because I am lazy, but this video is for posterity, so I was trying to do a really good job and really roll them out. Well, that turned out to be counterproductive. They actually taste better when they are a bit more chubby. Don't stay a slave to my recipe. Pick and choose which techniques to adapt and which shortcuts to get away with. Here are more thought-provoking culinary videos for you to check out, and if you are ever in the Boston area, maybe I'll see you in one of my classes.